Smash! An alien bully fist cracked against the flesh above Niran's nervous nose in a blur of green scales. As she flinched away from the violence, Russell grimacing at the pathetic scene that awaited him on his very first class at the prestigious Tarkalian Academy on Tarkus Prime. Russell glared across the class of scaly, reptilian aliens as blood flowed from Niran's face down into her alien uniform. The bully high-fived his buddies as the quiet grunts whispered. Russell smirked as he clutched his pen, waiting to respond until the right moment. His heart raced in anticipation, and he felt adrenaline rise within his skin. Oh boy, was he ready to stand up for the weak and show this alien scum what a human could do. Being the only human on this desolate planet, Russell dreaded what could happen if he didn't succeed at this prestigious alien institution. The Academy would be a chance for humanity's talents in quantum computing to impress the Tarkalian leaders, establishing humans as intellectual equals. But if he failed, the Tarkalians were itching for an excuse to deem humans as Neanderthals who didn't belong in their interstellar federation. Russell faced the front of the class as Professor Zorn began a lesson on advanced quantum mechanics, Russell's hand shooting into the air to correct the instructor's discussion of quantum entanglement. Zorn glared and ignored the human's raised hand, then called on Niran as punishment. "Explain quantum supremacy," Zorn barked, Niran fidgeting in fear and stumbling over her words as she struggled. "Earthling!" The bullies sneered as Russell clenched his jaw, their insults and Niran's mistreatment bringing back memories of the bullying Russell once faced on Earth. That night, Russell couldn't shake the disgust he felt at the blatant bullying Niran endured. His gut told him this wasn't an isolated incident. Determined to get to the bottom of it, he snuck into an empty computer lab after hours. Using tricks he'd picked up from his hacker buddy back on Earth, Russell wormed his way into the Academy's student records database. His eyes widened as he scoured Niran's file. Top marks in every class, yet a string of absences from social events and group projects. Then he found the smoking gun, a lengthy disciplinary record for the gang of reptilian thugs, an endless list of harassment complaints from female students. Russell's blood boiled as he noted the paltry punishments handed out. Looks like coming from influential families had its perks. Armed with this new intel, Russell cornered Niran in the cafeteria the following day. He could feel the bully's menacing glares drilling into his back as he plopped his tray across from her. "I've been reviewing the quantum entanglement materials," Russell said casually, as if they were old friends. "Your contributions to the class discussions have been brilliant. I was hoping we could study together sometime." Niran's eyes darted nervously to her tormentors before meeting Russell's gaze. You think I'm brilliant?" "Absolutely. I'd be lucky to have a study partner as sharp as you." A tentative smile crept onto Niran's face. "Okay, let's do it." As they pored over their notes, Russell gently probed. "I couldn't help but notice those guys always giving you a hard time. Does that happen a lot?" Niran's pen stilled. She took a shuddering breath. "You have no idea. Being one of the only females in the quantum mechanics program, I'm constantly belittled, talked down to, harassed." Tears pooled in her eyes. "They all think I don't belong here." Russell reached out and squeezed her hand. "I've got your back now. We'll show those assholes what you're made of." From that day forward, Russell became Niran's personal bodyguard. He made a point to walk with her in the halls, his muscular human form providing a silent warning. At lunch, his imposing presence at her table kept the bullies at bay. Slowly, Niran began to blossom, raising her hand in class and laughing more freely. But Russell knew they couldn't keep looking over their shoulders forever. They needed to take more decisive action, and soon, before the bullies retaliated. He started formulating a plan. With Niran by his side, Russell threw himself into their quantum mechanics project. They spent long hours in the lab, poring over equations and debating theories. Niran's unique perspective, shaped by her Tarkalian upbringing, meshed perfectly with Russell's human intuition. They pushed each other to think beyond the conventional wisdom that had stymied the Tarkalian scientific community for so long. Late one night, as they stared bleary-eyed at the holographic projections of their latest simulation, Niran let out a gasp. Russell, look at this. She pointed to an anomaly in the data, a fluctuation that defied the accepted models. Russell's brow furrowed as he examined the readout. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. Holy shit, Neron, I think you just cracked it. They worked feverishly to refine their findings, barely sleeping as the date of their presentation loomed. When the day finally arrived, they strode into Professor Zorn's classroom with their heads held high. Russell could feel the resentful glares of Carthax and his crew boring into his back, but he paid them no mind. This was Neron's moment to shine. As Neron launched into their presentation, the class sat in stunned silence. Her clear explanations and groundbreaking insights left even Professor Zorn speechless. When she concluded, the room erupted into a mix of enthusiastic applause and disgruntled muttering from the bullies. "Well done, both of you," Professor Zorn said grudgingly. "This is truly remarkable work." Neron beamed with pride, and Russell felt a swell of satisfaction. They had shown everyone what a human Tarkalian partnership could achieve. But their triumph was short-lived. As the other students filed out of the classroom, Carthax and his thugs lingered behind. Russell, engrossed in a discussion with Professor Zorn about the potential applications of their discovery, didn't notice as they surrounded Neron. "Think you're hot shit now, don't you?" Carthax sneered, shoving Neron against the wall. "Just because you've got that stupid human fighting your battles?" "Please, just leave me alone," Neron whimpered, trying to push past them. But Carthax grabbed her by the neck, his claws digging into her flesh. "You don't belong here, bitch, and we're going to make sure you never forget it." The first punch drove the air from Neron's lungs. The second sent her crashing to the floor. Carthax and his minions rained down blows and kicks, their laughter mixing with Neron's cries of pain. Russell's head snapped up at the sound of the commotion. His eyes widened in horror as he took in the scene. Neron, curled in a ball on the ground, her green blood splattering the floor. Carthax, standing over her with a vicious grin, his fists clenched for another strike. Something inside Russell snapped. A red haze descended over his vision as he lunged across the room, a primal roar tearing from his throat. He tackled Carthax to the ground, his fists flying with ruthless precision. Bones crunched beneath his knuckles as he pummeled the Tarkalian, rage fueling his every blow. Distantly, he heard shouts and the pounding of footsteps. Hands grasped at his arms, trying to haul him away, but Russell was lost in a berserker frenzy. Only when Professor Zorn's voice cut through the chaos did he finally relent. "Enough!" Zorn roared, physically inserting himself between Russell and Carthax's prone form. Russell struggled against the faculty members restraining him, his chest heaving with exertion and anger. As they dragged him out of the classroom, Russell caught a final glimpse of Neron. She had pulled herself into a sitting position, her face a mask of shock and pain. Carthax lay unconscious a few feet away, his face a ruined mess of blood and shattered scales. Medics swarmed around him, frantically working to stabilize his vital signs for transport to the infirmary. Russell sat stone-faced before the school board, a panel of grim Tarkalians glaring down at him with undisguised contempt. The air crackled with tension as the head of the board, a grizzled elder with a jagged scar running down his snout, cleared his throat. "Human Russell," he began, his voice dripping with disdain, "you stand accused of brutally assaulting a fellow student, one Carthax Zorlak. How do you plead?" Russell met the elder's gaze unflinchingly. "I did what was necessary to defend my friend." A murmur rippled through the gathered faculty and students. The elder slammed his clawed hand down on the podium, silencing the room. "Your friend is a troublemaker and a liar," he snarled. "Carthax is a model student from a respected family. We have no reason to believe her wild accusations." Russell opened his mouth to protest, but a soft voice from the back of the room beat him to it. "I have evidence." Head swiveled as Neron stepped forward, her bruised face set in determined lines. She limped to the front of the room, clutching a datapad in her trembling hands. "Esteemed elders," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, I come before you today not just as a victim, but as a witness to the systemic abuse and harassment faced by female students at this institution. She tapped the datapad, and a holographic projection sprang to life above their heads. Security camera footage played out in damning detail, showing Carthax and his cronies cornering Neron, their blows raining down on her helpless form. Gasps of horror filled the room as Neron scrolled through screen after screen of incident reports, each one detailing another act of violence or intimidation against female students. Medical records flashed by, painting a grim picture of the physical and emotional toll of the abuse. "This has been going on for years," Neron said, her voice shaking with rage and pain. "And the administration has done nothing to stop it. They've turned a blind eye to the suffering of their own students, all to protect the privileged few." Silence fell over the room as Neron finished her presentation. The elders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet her accusing gaze. Finally, the scarred elder spoke. "In light of this new evidence, the board has no choice but to suspend Carthax and his accomplices pending a full investigation." Russell let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Neran's shoulders sagged in relief, tears streaming down her face. But their victory was short-lived. The doors to the hearing room burst open, and a tall Tarkalian in ornate robes strode in, flanked by a phalanx of armed guards. "I am Zorlon Zorlak," he announced, his voice booming through the chamber, "Minister of Education and Father of Carthax, and I will not stand for this farce of a hearing." He turned to the elders, his eyes flashing with barely contained rage. "You will reinstate my son and his friends immediately. And as for this human troublemaker..." Zorlon leveled a clawed finger at Russell. "He is hereby expelled from the Tarkalian Academy and ordered to leave Tarkus Prime within the next solar cycle. If he sets foot on this planet again, he will be arrested and tried for his crimes." Russell surged to his feet, his fists clenched in fury. "You can't do this. Neran told the truth. She showed you the proof." Zorlon sneered. "The word of a lowly female against the honor of a Zorlak? Don't make me laugh." He turned on his heel and marched out of the room, his guards falling in step behind him. The elders sat in stunned silence for a moment before the scarred one spoke. "The minister's orders stand," he said heavily. "Carthax and the others are reinstated. Russell of Earth, you have until dawn to gather your belongings and depart." Russell looked to Neran, expecting her to protest, to fight back, but she just shook her head, her eyes filled with despair. "I'm sorry, Russell," she whispered. "My father, he says if I speak out again, he'll disown me. I can't lose my family." Russell felt like he'd been punched in the gut. After everything they'd been through, everything they'd fought for, it had all been for nothing. He stumbled out of the hearing room in a daze, his mind reeling. He had mere hours to pack up his meager possessions and say his goodbyes. As he tossed his clothes into a battered suitcase, a soft knock sounded at his door. He opened it to find Neran, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "And to give you this." She pressed a small data chip into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "It's a copy of our project," she explained. "All our research, all our findings. I want you to have it." Russell stared at her, uncomprehending. "But why? What's the point now?" Neron gripped his hand tightly, her eyes boring into his. "Because our work is too important to let it die here. You have to continue it, Russell. You have to show the universe what we discovered." She leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. "And when you do, come back for me. Don't let them win. Don't let this be the end of our story." With that, she pressed a soft kiss to his cheek and slipped away, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Russell stood there for a long moment, the data chip clutched to his chest, as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky outside his window. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Neran was right. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Russell gazed out at the inky void of space through the narrow viewport of his cramped berth, the hum of the ship's engines a constant drone in his ears. His mind raced with thoughts of Neron, replaying their final moments together over and over. The weight of the data chip she had entrusted to him seemed to burn a hole in his pocket. He couldn't shake the image of her bruised and battered face, the hopelessness in her eyes as she watched him leave. The injustice of it all gnawed at his gut. He had to do something. He couldn't let the Tarkaleans get away with their blatant corruption and discrimination. Russell pulled out his communicator and dialed a familiar number. After a few moments, his old friend Jake's face appeared on the screen, his shaggy hair and thick-rimmed glasses unchanged from their days at MIT. "Russ, my man," Jake grinned. "How's life among the lizard people?" Russell didn't return the smile. "Not great, Jake. I need your help." He launched into the story, telling Jake everything from Niran's brilliance to the relentless bullying she faced to their groundbreaking project. When he got to the part about his expulsion and Niran's desperate gift of the data chip, Jake let out a low whistle. "Damn, Russ, that's some heavy shit." "I can't let them get away with it, Jake. I have to expose what's going on at that school, and I think this data might be the key." Jake's eyes lit up. "Send it over. Let's take a look." For the next several hours, they pored over the quantum mechanics simulations and equations, their excitement growing with each new revelation. The implications were staggering. Niran and Russell's work could revolutionize intergalactic travel as they knew it. "This is big, Russ," Jake said, his voice hushed with awe. "Like Nobel Prize big." Russell nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "We need to get this in front of the right people. The scientific community, the media, the UN. If we can show them what the Tarkaleans are trying to suppress, it could be the leverage we need to force them to address the discrimination and corruption," Jake finished. "They wouldn't be able to sweep it under the rug anymore." Russell felt a flicker of hope for the first time since leaving Tarkus Prime. "Exactly. I'm going to put together a presentation. Can you reach out to your contacts, see if you can get me in front of some key players?" "Consider it done, buddy. We'll make them listen." As Russell signed off, he clutched the data chip tightly in his fist. "Hold on, Niran," he thought fiercely. "I won't let you down." Light years away, Niran walked through the halls of the Tarkalean Academy with her head down, trying to ignore the pointed stares and whispered insults that followed her every step. In the weeks since Russell's expulsion, the harassment had only gotten worse. She found her lab projects sabotaged, her notes erased, her locker vandalized with crude slurs. Everywhere she turned, Carthax and his minions were there, their mere presence a silent threat. Niran knew she should report them, but to whom? The administration had made it clear they wouldn't lift a claw to help her, and her own father. Niran pushed away the thought of his disappointment, his warning to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She entered the lab, steeling herself for another day of isolation and intimidation. But as she reached her workstation, her heart stopped. Her equipment lay in ruins, wires slashed and components smashed beyond repair. And there, leaning against the wreckage with a smug grin, was Carthax. "Oops," he drawled. "Looks like you had a little accident." Niran felt hot tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Leave me alone, Carthax," she said, hating the tremble in her voice. "Haven't you done enough?" Quick as a viper, Carthax seized her arm, his claws digging into her flesh. He dragged her into a secluded corner of the lab, his buddies forming a menacing wall behind him. "Shut up, you little bitch," Carthax snarled. "You think you're untouchable because of your pet human? Well, he's not here to protect you anymore." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gleaming plasma pistol. Niran's blood turned to ice as he pressed the barrel to her temple. "Now you're going to be a good girl and go to the elders. You're going to tell them you lied about everything, that you're nothing but a hysterical female who can't handle a little rough play. Understand?" Niran trembled, her mind racing. If she recanted, they'd won. Russell's sacrifice, her own bravery in speaking out, it would all be for nothing. But if she refused? Carthax's finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, her communicator chimed with an incoming message. Carthax glanced at it, sneering. Expecting a call? Too bad. You're not going anywhere until... His words died as his eyes fell on the screen. There, blinking insistently, was a single line of text. You are not alone. Help is coming. Stay strong. Niran stared at the message, hardly daring to breathe. She didn't recognize the sender, but something about the words filled her with a sudden, reckless courage. She lifted her chin, looking Carthax dead in the eye. No, she said, her voice steady. I won't lie. Not for you. Not for anyone. Carthax recoiled as if she'd slapped him. For a moment, he seemed at a loss. Then his features twisted with rage. You'll regret this, he spat. I'll make sure you... He never finished his threat. The lab doors burst open, and a squad of Tarkalian security officers stormed in, weapons drawn. Carthax Zorlak, the lead officer barked. Drop your weapon and step away from the female. Carthax gaped at them, his arrogance evaporating. What is this? You can't... Oh, I think you'll find we can, a new voice cut in. Niran turned to see a tall, distinguished Tarkalian in the robes of a high counselor stride into the lab. Or did you forget that threatening a fellow student with a deadly weapon is grounds for immediate expulsion and criminal charges? The counselor turned to Niran, his eyes softening. Niran Zak, I owe you an apology on behalf of the Academy and the Council. We failed you, and every female who has suffered at the hands of these thugs. But thanks to the evidence you bravely brought forward, that ends today. As the security officers hauled a sputtering Carthax away, Niran felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. They had won. Her communicator chimed again. With shaking hands, she opened the new message. Knew you could do it. Keep your head up. Things are about to change. Niran smiled through her tears, clutching the communicator to her chest. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Russell's heart raced as his ship touched down on the landing pad at the Tarkalian Academy. A sea of reptilian faces turned to watch as he disembarked, some curious, others clearly hostile. But among them, one familiar figure stood out, Niran, her eyes shining with joy and relief as she rushed forward to embrace him. You came back, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I knew you would. Russell held her tight, breathing in her scent. I couldn't leave you to fight this battle alone. As they pulled apart, a group of Tarkalian officials approached, their robes adorned with the intricate symbols of their rank. The leader, a tall male with a jagged scar running down his snout, extended a clawed hand to Russell. Human Russell, he intoned, his deep voice resonating with grudging respect. On behalf of the Tarkalian government, I wish to express our gratitude for your role in exposing the corruption and discrimination within our education system. Your actions have set in motion a long overdue reckoning. Russell shook the proffered hand, meeting the official's gaze steadily. I only did what was right, but the real hero is Niran. She had the courage to speak out, even when it seemed like no one would listen. The official inclined his head towards Niran, who stood tall and proud beside Russell. Indeed, which is why we have a proposition for you both. He gestured to his colleagues, who stepped forward with a holographic display. We are forming a special committee to oversee the reform of our educational institutions. We would be honored if you would serve as advisors, lending your unique perspectives and experiences to guide us in creating a more just and equitable system. Russell and Niran exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, as one, they turned back to the officials. We accept, Russell said, his voice ringing with determination. But we have some conditions. Over the next several hours, they hammered out the details of their new roles. Russell and Niran would have full access to all records and personnel, the authority to implement changes as they saw fit, and a direct line to the highest levels of government. In return, they pledged to work tirelessly to root out discrimination, promote inclusion, and ensure that every student, regardless of gender or background, had an equal opportunity to succeed. As the meeting adjourned, Russell pulled Niran aside. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Carthax and his father have fled the planet. They're hiding out somewhere, trying to avoid prosecution." Niran's eyes flashed with anger, but also a hint of fear. "They won't get away with it," she vowed. "We'll find them and bring them to justice." Russell nodded grimly. "Agreed, but for now we have work to do here." They threw themselves into their new roles with a passion, poring over data and conducting interviews late into the night. They drafted new policies and training programs, fought for increased funding and resources, and personally oversaw the implementation of each reform. But change did not come easily. They faced resistance at every turn, from conservative factions who saw their traditional power structures threatened, to disgruntled students and faculty who resented the new order. Russell and Niran found themselves the targets of a vicious smear campaign, their characters assassinated and their motives questioned in the media. Even more chilling were the death threats that began to arrive, each one more graphic and disturbing than the last. Russell insisted on taking the brunt of the security risks, his human physiology better equipped to withstand an attack. But Niran refused to cower, standing tall and defiant in the face of hatred and intolerance. One night, as they pored over a particularly contentious policy proposal, an urgent message flashed across their screens. A bomb had detonated at a nearby university, targeting the office of a professor who had been a vocal supporter of their reform efforts. Russell and Niran rushed to the scene, their hearts in their throats. As they picked their way through the rubble and shattered glass, a sickening realization began to dawn. This was no random act of violence. It was a coordinated attack, designed to strike fear into the hearts of their allies and derail their progress. Russell's mind raced as he helped load the injured onto stretchers. The timing, the location, the target, it all pointed to one chilling conclusion. Carthax and his father were behind this, and they were just getting started. Russell's fingers flew across the console as he opened a secure channel to Earth. Jake's face filled the screen, his brows furrowed in concern. "What's the situation, Russ? Your message sounded urgent." "I need your help, Jake. Niran and I have been investigating the recent attacks on Tarkus Prime, and we think Carthax and his father are behind it." Russell quickly brought Jake up to speed on the events of the past few weeks, the reform efforts, the resistance they'd faced, and the escalating violence targeting their supporters. "We need hard evidence to link them to the attacks," Russell said, "and we think the key might be in their financial records and communications." Jake cracked his knuckles, a glint of determination in his eye. "I'm on it. Give me a few hours to work my magic." As Jake got to work, Russell and Niran pored over the data they'd collected so far. A pattern began to emerge, whispers of a secret base on a distant, lawless planet, a hub for criminal activity and extremist groups. It was the perfect place for Carthax and his father to hide. Jake's voice crackled over the comm. "I've got something. A series of encrypted transactions between Carthax's father and a known arms dealer on a planet called Zaxos. It's a real hive of scum and villainy." Russell and Niran exchanged a glance. "That's got to be where they're hiding," Niran said. They presented their findings to the Tarkalian authorities, but were met with hesitation and red tape. The officials were wary of the potential political fallout of launching a mission to such a notorious planet. Frustration mounting, Russell and Niran retreated to their quarters to regroup. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to make a move," Russell said, pacing the room. "We have to take action." Niran nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. "I agree. We need to go to Zaxos ourselves, gather the evidence we need to bring them to justice." Russell pulled up a list of contacts on his communicator, scanning for a familiar name. "I know someone who can help, an old friend from my military days. He's got the skills and resources we need for a covert op like this." A few hours later, they were on a secure call with Jax, a grizzled human with a scar running down his cheek. "I can get you the gear and intel you need," Jax said. "But this is a dangerous game you're playing. Zaxos ain't no place for tourists." "We don't have a choice," Russell said grimly. We're the only ones who can stop this. As they made their preparations, a message pinged on Niran's communicator. It was from an anonymous sender, claiming to have inside knowledge of Carthax's operation. "I have information that can bring him down," the message read. "Meet me on Zaxos at the coordinates below. Come alone." Russell and Niran shared an uneasy look. It could be a trap, but it was a risk they had to take. "There's no turning back now," Russell said, his jaw set. "Let's get ready for a fight." The battered freighter shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the rugged surface of Zaxos filling the cockpit viewport. Russell and Niran exchanged a tense glance, their disguises carefully prepared. They'd spent the journey reviewing intel on the local customs and power players, determined to blend in seamlessly with the hardened population. As they disembarked into the grimy spaceport, the acrid stench of fuel and unwashed bodies assaulted their nostrils. Niran's hand drifted towards her concealed blaster as a group of heavily armed Krogans leered at her, but Russell's warning glance kept her in check. Attracting attention would only jeopardize their mission. They made their way through the winding, trash-strewn alleyways of the settlement, dodging pickpockets and spice dealers with practiced ease. The cantina where they were to meet the tipster loomed ahead, its flickering neon sign buzzing and spitting in the fetid air. Inside, the dimly lit room was packed with a dizzying array of alien species, all engaged in various stages of drunken debauchery and illicit deals. Russell and Niran wove their way to a booth in the back, where a cloaked figure already awaited them. "You, Russell?" The tipster's voice was a rasping whisper, his features obscured by a tattered hood. At Russell's curt nod, he slid a small data chip across the table. "Everything you need to nail those Tarkalean bastards. Encrypted, but you seem resourceful enough." Just as Russell's fingers closed around the chip, the cantina erupted into chaos. Blaster fire ripped through the air as a gang of heavily armed thugs burst through the doors, led by a massive Krogan with a glowing red eye. "Find the humans!" he roared, his voice booming over the panicked shouts of the patrons. Russell shoved Niran down as a barrage of plasma bolts slammed into their booth, reducing it to molten slag. The tipster slumped forward, a smoking hole in his chest. Niran grabbed Russell's hand and yanked him towards the back exit, blaster already in hand. They burst out into the alley, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Plasma bolts scorched the walls as they ran, the thugs' guttural shouts echoing off the metal buildings. "They knew we were coming!" Niran gasped, ducking as a bolt sizzled past her ear. "Carthax must have eyes everywhere!" Russell gritted his teeth, mind racing. Their entire plan hinged on secrecy, on catching Carthax unaware. With their cover blown, they were running out of options. "The data chip," he panted, sprinting down a side alley. "We need to find somewhere to decrypt it, transmit the evidence back to Tarkus Prime." Niran's eyes darted around the grimy alleyway, searching for inspiration. Suddenly, her gaze landed on a faded sign, barely legible through the layers of grime. "There!" She pointed to the crumbling ruins of an abandoned mining facility, clinging to the rocky cliffs at the edge of the settlement. "We can hole up there, buy ourselves some time." They scrambled up the treacherous path, the shouts of their pursuers growing fainter as they climbed. The facility was a maze of rusted catwalks and crumbling equipment, the perfect place to lose a tail. Tucked away in the moldering remains of a control room, Russell plugged the data chip into his portable terminal. His fingers flew across the keys as he worked to crack the encryption, Niran standing guard at the door with her blaster drawn. "I'm in," Russell breathed, his eyes widening as the files spilled across the screen. Schematics, financial records, intercepted communications, a damning web of evidence linking Carthax and his father to the attacks on Tarkus Prime. But as they delved deeper, a creeping sense of horror settled over them. It wasn't just Carthax and his father. High-ranking government officials, crime syndicates, even elements of the Tarkalean military, all tangled together in a vast conspiracy, with tendrils stretching across the galaxy. And at the center of it all, a shadowy extremist group known only as the Scar of Zaxos, led by none other than Carthax's father himself. Niren's hand shook as she pointed to a schematic on the screen, a devastating weapon capable of wiping out entire cities. They're planning something big, Russell. Something that could destroy everything we've worked for. Russell's jaw clenched as he downloaded the files, his mind racing with the implications. They had to get this information back to Tarkus Prime, rally their allies, stop the Scar before it was too late. But first, they had to survive the armies of thugs and assassins that were no doubt scouring the settlement for them at this very moment. Russell shot a grim look at Niran, the weight of their discovery hanging heavy between them. It was going to be a long, bloody night on Zaxos. Russell's fingers flew across the console as he tried again to transmit the decrypted evidence files back to their allies on Tarkus Prime. The screen flashed red with an error message. All communication channels jammed. Damn it! Russell slammed his fist on the rusted metal table. They've cut us off completely. We have to get this data back ourselves. Niran nodded grimly as she stuffed the data chip securely into a hidden pocket. Then there's no time to waste. Let's move. They crept through the crumbling ruins of the mining facility, blasters drawn and senses on high alert. Russell's heart pounded in his ears as they neared the exit, praying they could reach their concealed ship undetected. A blinding flash erupted in front of them. Russell shoved Niran behind a collapsed support beam as a hail of blaster fire rained down, scorching the metal walls. Well, what do we have here? A familiar voice sneered. Carthax stepped through the smoke, flanked by a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. Thought you could sneak away with the evidence? Not on my watch. Russell and Niran locked eyes, a silent plan passing between them. They'd trained for this, drilled in close combat tactics by Russell's battle-hardened friend. It was time to put those skills to the test. They burst from cover, blasters spitting plasma as they dodged and wove through the onslaught. Russell felt the searing heat of a bolt graze his shoulder, but he pushed through the pain, dropping 2 mercs with well-placed shots. Beside him, Niran was a blur of motion, her lithe form twisting and leaping as she took down enemy after enemy. But even with their superior training, they were badly outnumbered. Russell saw Niran pinned down, her blaster knocked from her hand. Without hesitation, she scooped up a fallen merc's grenade and lobbed it towards the main group. Russell, now! He dove for cover as the grenade detonated, the shockwave sending bodies flying. In the chaos, Russell spotted Carthax, disoriented but still standing. This was his chance. Russell charged, closing the distance in seconds. He slammed into Carthax, sending them both tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs. They grappled and rolled, exchanging brutal blows. Carthax lashed out with his claws, raking deep gashes across Russell's face. Russell tasted blood, but lunged forward, smashing his forehead into Carthax's snout with a sickening crunch. Carthax reeled back, and Russell pressed his advantage. He drove his knee into the Tarkalian's gut, doubling him over, then rained down a flurry of punches that snapped Carthax's head back like a rag doll. The Tarkalian crumpled to the ground, out cold. Russell staggered to his feet, chest heaving, and scanned the room. Niran stood amidst a sea of fallen enemies, battered but alive. Let's go! Russell grabbed her hand, and they sprinted for the exit, leaping over rubble and fallen beams. Blaster fire zipped past as the remaining mercs gave chase, but Russell and Niran didn't look back. They burst out into the harsh light of Zaxos' sun, racing for their hidden ship. Russell could hear the pounding of heavy boots behind them, the angry shouts of Carthax's men. They leaped into the cockpit, hands flying over the controls. The engines roared to life as blaster bolts pinged off the hull. Russell wrenched the controls, and the ship shot forward, narrowly missing a barrage of missiles. "We've got company," Niran yelled, pointing to the sensor screen. A squadron of enemy fighters streaked towards them, cannons blazing. Russell gritted his teeth and pulled the ship into a steep climb, juking and weaving as the enemy tried to lock on. G-forces slammed him back in his seat, but he pushed the throttle to full, coaxing every ounce of speed from the straining engines. Niran's fingers danced over the weapons control, rerouting power and tweaking targeting algorithms. The ship shuddered as she fired back, the modified cannons punching through the enemy shields like they were paper. One by one, the enemy fighters exploded into fireballs, but more kept coming. Russell rolled the ship, narrowly evading a missile lock, then dove into a corkscrew turn that made his vision blur. Alarms blared as the shields absorbed hit after hit. They couldn't keep this up forever. They had to lose their pursuers and fast, or all their sacrifices would be for nothing. Russell spared a glance to Niran, her face lit by the glow of the control screens, determination etched in every line. She met his gaze and gave a sharp nod. No words were needed. They were in this together, no matter what happened. Russell turned back to the battle, hands tightening on the controls. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Failure was not an option. As Russell and Niran's ship descended through the atmosphere of Tarkus Prime, the capital city sprawling out beneath them, they were stunned by the scene that greeted them. The landing platform was a sea of Tarkalian faces, a massive crowd of supporters that stretched as far as the eye could see. The roar of their cheers was deafening as Russell and Niran stepped out onto the platform, the warm air of Tarkus Prime washing over them. Niran's eyes widened as she took in the throngs of people chanting their names, holding up signs of support and gratitude. Russell squeezed her hand, a lump forming in his throat as he realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished. They were quickly ushered into a waiting transport, flanked by a security detail that parted the sea of supporters. As they sped towards the High Council chambers, Niran turned to Russell, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I'd see the day when our people would stand together like this," she said softly. "You've given them hope, Russell. You've shown them that change is possible." Russell shook his head, meeting her gaze with a fierce intensity. "We did this together, Niran. You and me, and everyone who believed in us. This is just the beginning." The High Council chambers were in a state of chaos when they arrived, with council members shouting over each other and aides rushing back and forth with armloads of data pads. But as Russell and Niran entered the room, a hush fell over the assembly. The High Counselor, an aged Tarkalian with piercing yellow eyes, stepped forward to greet them. "Russell of Earth, Nir and Zach," he intoned solemnly, "you have brought great shame upon our people by exposing the depths of our corruption. But in doing so, you have also given us a chance to rebuild, to create a society worthy of the Tarkalian name. For that, we owe you a debt of gratitude." He gestured to the data chip in Russell's hand. "Please, present the evidence you have gathered." For the next several hours, the council chamber was silent except for the hum of the data screens and the occasional gasp of shock or murmur of outrage as the extent of the conspiracy was laid bare. High-ranking officials, wealthy businessmen, even members of the council itself were implicated in the web of corruption that had festered for so long. As the final piece of evidence was presented, the High Counselor rose to his feet, his face a mask of grim determination. In light of this damning evidence, the High Council has no choice but to order the immediate arrest of all those involved in this shameful affair. Justice will be swift and merciless. The chamber erupted into a frenzy of activity as security forces moved to apprehend the guilty parties. Russell and Niran watched in satisfaction as Carthax and his father were dragged before the council in chains, their once proud faces twisted with fear and rage. In the days that followed, Russell and Niran threw themselves into the work of reform, meeting with the Education Reform Committee to draft sweeping changes to the Tarkalian educational system. They worked tirelessly, fueled by the knowledge that their efforts would shape the future of an entire generation. As they presented their proposals to the council, Niran's voice rang out clear and strong. "For too long, our society has been plagued by inequality and discrimination. But today, we have the chance to build a new Tarkus Prime, one where every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of their background or identity." The council chamber erupted in applause, and Russell felt a swell of pride in his chest. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything for. A chance to create a better world. But even as they basked in the glow of their success, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The Galactic Council, the most powerful interplanetary organization in the known universe, had taken notice of the events on Tarkus Prime. Russell and Niron were summoned to a private meeting with the Council's emissary, a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the cosmos. The emissary spoke in a voice that echoed with the weight of centuries. "The Galactic Council has watched your struggle with great interest," the emissary intoned. "Your bravery and dedication to justice have impressed us greatly. We believe that Tarkus Prime has the potential to become a shining example of what is possible when a society commits itself to equality and progress." The emissary paused, fixing Russell and Niran with an intense gaze. "The Council wishes to offer its assistance in your reform efforts. We will send a delegation of our finest experts to work alongside you, to share the knowledge and experience of countless advanced civilizations." Russell and Niran exchanged a glance, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. The support of the Galactic Council could catapult their efforts to new heights, accelerating the pace of change in ways they had never dreamed possible. But as they shook hands with the emissary and watched the sleek council ship disappear into the sky, Russell couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges were still to come. The corruption ran deep on Tarkus Prime, and those who had benefited from it would not give up their power easily. He turned to Niran, his jaw set with determination. "We've come this far," he said quietly. "We can't stop now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Niran nodded, her eyes blazing with the same fierce resolve that had carried them through so much already. "Together," she agreed, clasping his hand tightly. As the sleek Galactic Council ship descended through the atmosphere, Russell and Niran stood side by side on the landing platform, their hearts racing with anticipation. The hatch hissed open, revealing a delegation of exotic aliens from across the galaxy, each more fascinating and different than the last. A tall, willowy being with shimmering silver skin approached them, bowing gracefully in greeting. "Russell of Earth, Niran Zak," she said, her melodic voice echoing in their minds. "The Galactic Council welcomes you. Please, follow me." They were led into a lavish conference room where dozens of delegates sat around a circular table. Some had scales and horns, others had tentacles and antennae, but all exuded an aura of wisdom and power. As the meeting began, delegates shared stories of their own struggles with inequality and prejudice. A reptilian ambassador described how his people had once been enslaved by a technologically superior race. A crystalline being recounted the centuries of civil war that had torn her world apart. During a break in the discussions, a small, furry delegate approached Russell, his large eyes brimming with emotion. "Your story has touched the hearts of my people," he said, pressing a data chip into Russell's hand. "We too have suffered under the yoke of oppression. Your bravery has inspired us to fight for change." Russell looked down at the chip, his eyes widening as he read the proposal contained within. A galaxy-wide education initiative, promoting diversity and inclusion on a scale never before seen. "I am humbled," Russell said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would be honored to work with you on this. Together, we can make a real difference." As Russell discussed the details with his new ally, Niran found herself surrounded by a group of young Tarkalians, their eyes shining with admiration. "Niran Zak," a small female said, her voice trembling. "I want to be brave like you, but I'm scared. I don't know how to stand up to the bullies." Niran knelt down, taking the girl's hands in her own. "I was scared too," she said softly. "But I learned that true strength comes from within, from knowing that you are fighting for what is right." The girl nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Will you teach me? Will you show me how to be strong?" Niran felt a lump form in her throat. She saw so much of herself in this child, so much pain and fear and untapped potential. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I will teach you. I will teach all of you. Together, we will build a brighter future for Tarkus Prime." As the meeting concluded and the delegates began to disperse, word began to spread of the fates of Carthax and his co-conspirators. Crowds gathered around public view screens, watching in stunned silence as the verdicts were announced. Life imprisonment, hard labor, total asset seizure. The punishments were severe, uncompromising, a clear message to any who would seek to abuse their power. In the streets, a cheer began to rise, tentative at first, then growing in strength and volume until it was a deafening roar. The people of Tarkus Prime had spoken. The old ways were dying, and a new era was dawning. Russell and Niran stood amidst the celebration, their hands clasped tightly together. They had won a great victory, but they knew the fight was far from over. There would be setbacks and challenges ahead, new enemies to face, and old prejudices to overcome. But as they looked out at the sea of hopeful faces, at the Galactic Council ships glinting in the sky above, they felt a sense of unstoppable momentum, a feeling that anything was possible, that no injustice could stand forever in the face of unity and determination. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Russell and Niran would face it together, side by side, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. For they knew that the greatest strength of all lay not in the unparalleled might of their combined intellect or in the glorious technological advances of the Tarkalian race. It lay in the unbreakable bonds of friendship and common decency that held them together, in the basic values that they, for all their differences, shared beneath the superficial trappings of ideology and politics. And in that shared understanding, that recognition of the fundamental worthiness in all thinking beings, lay the seeds of a truly great civilization. As the dust settled on the trials of Carthax and his co-conspirators, Russell and Niran threw themselves into their work with a renewed sense of purpose. They met with students and faculty across Tarkus Prime, listening to their stories and gathering feedback on the reforms they had implemented. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many Tarkalians expressing gratitude for the changes and a newfound sense of hope for the future. However, not everyone was pleased with the new direction of Tarkalian society. A small but vocal group of conservative politicians, led by Senator Zorgax, began to voice their opposition to the reforms. They held press conferences and gave interviews, accusing Russell and Niran of being pawns of the Galactic Council, seeking to undermine Tarkalian culture and values. These so-called reforms are nothing more than an attempt to impose alien ideologies on our proud society, Senator Zorgax declared, his voice dripping with disdain. We cannot allow our traditions to be eroded by the misguided actions of a human and a traitorous female. At first, Russell and Niran tried to ignore the attacks, focusing instead on their work and the positive impact they were having on the lives of Tarkalian students. They visited schools and universities, speaking with students who had once been marginalized and excluded, but were now thriving in the new, more inclusive environment. One young female student, her scales of vibrant blue, approached Niran after a presentation, her eyes shining with tears. "I never thought I would have the opportunity to study quantum mechanics," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But because of you, I now have a chance to pursue my dreams. Thank you, Niranzak. Thank you for fighting for us." Niran embraced the student, her own eyes glistening with tears. "You are the reason we do this work," she said softly. "Never forget that you have value and that your dreams matter." But as the weeks passed, Senator Zorgax's rhetoric grew more heated and his followers more vocal. They staged protests outside of schools and government buildings, waving signs that read, "Tarkus Prime for Tarkalians and no alien influence." The media began to take notice, and soon the controversy was dominating the news cycles. Russell and Niran watched with growing concern as the opposition gained traction. They knew that they could not allow the progress they had made to be undone by a handful of reactionary politicians. "We have to do something," Russell said, his jaw set with determination. "We can't let them win." Niran nodded, her eyes flashing with resolve. "I agree. It's time to take the fight to them." They reached out to their allies in the government and the media, proposing a series of public debates with Senator Zorgax and his followers. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon the debates were being organized, with the full backing of the Tarkalian High Council. The first debate was held in the capital city, in a grand amphitheater that was packed to capacity with Tarkalians from all walks of life. Russell and Niran took the stage, their heads held high, ready to defend the reforms they had worked so hard to implement. Senator Zorgax was the first to speak, his voice booming through the sound system. "My fellow Tarkalians," he began, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "We stand at a crossroads. On one path lies the preservation of our ancient traditions and way of life. On the other, the erosion of our identity, the surrender of our sovereignty to alien influences. I ask you, which path will you choose?" The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Russell stepped forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Senator Zorgax speaks of tradition and identity," he said, his voice calm but forceful. "But what he really means is the preservation of a system that has oppressed and excluded far too many Tarkalians for far too long. The reforms we have implemented are not about eroding Tarkalian culture, but about ensuring that every Tarkalian has the opportunity to participate fully in that culture, regardless of their gender, their background, or their beliefs." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am not here as a representative of the Galactic Council, or as a human seeking to impose my values on your society. I am here as someone who has seen firsthand the devastation that discrimination and inequality can cause, and who believes that every sentient being has the right to be treated with dignity and respect." Niran stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I am a Tarkalian," she said, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I was born and raised on this planet, and I have dedicated my life to the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of our society. But as a female in a male-dominated field, I have faced countless obstacles and barriers simply because of my gender." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have been belittled, harassed, and excluded. I have been told that I don't belong, that I should stay in my place. But I refuse to accept that. I refuse to believe that my value as a Tarkalian, as a scientist, as a thinking being, is any less than that of my male colleagues." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "The reforms we have implemented are not about special treatment or favoritism. They are about ensuring that every Tarkalian has the same opportunities, the same rights, and the same respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. They are about building a society that is stronger, more vibrant, and more just for all of us." As the debate continued, Russell and Niran presented a compelling case for the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. They shared stories of students whose lives had been transformed by the reforms and painted a vivid picture of the harm caused by discrimination and exclusion. Senator Zorgax and his followers tried to counter their arguments, but they found themselves on the defensive, struggling to justify their opposition in the face of overwhelming evidence of the positive impact of the changes. As the debate drew to a close, the crowd erupted in applause, with many Tarkalians rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Russell and Niran clasped hands, their faces beaming with pride and relief. But the most surprising moment was yet to come. As the moderator prepared to wrap up the proceedings, Senator Zorgax stepped forward, his face a mask of contrition. "I have something to say," he said, his voice trembling. "I have been wrong. I have been blinded by my own prejudices and fears, and I have failed to see the truth that has been staring me in the face." He turned to Russell and Niran, his eyes glistening with tears. "I have opposed these reforms at every turn, but I can no longer deny the evidence of their success. I have seen the joy on the faces of the students who have been given a chance to thrive, and I have heard the stories of those who have suffered under the old ways." He took a deep breath, his voice cracking with emotion. "I was wrong, and I am sorry. I pledge my support to the reforms and to the vision of a more just and equitable Tarkus Prime that Russell and Niran have fought so hard to create." The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, shocked by the senator's sudden reversal. But as the news spread across the planet, a sense of hope and unity began to take hold. The remaining debates were a formality, with public opinion now firmly in favor of the reforms. Senator Zorgax's followers began to defect, with many publicly apologizing for their opposition and pledging their support to the changes. In the weeks that followed, Russell and Niran worked tirelessly to build on the momentum of their victory. They met with lawmakers and educators, business leaders and community activists, working to create a broad coalition in support of the reforms. And as they looked out at the sea of Tarkalian faces, united in their commitment to a brighter future, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But together, they would face them head-on, armed with the power of their convictions and the strength of their bond. In the wake of their successful public debates, Russell and Niran found themselves inundated with messages of support from across Tarkus Prime. But one communication stood out from the rest, an official invitation from the Galactic Council to present their experiences and the impact of their educational reforms at the upcoming annual summit. Russell looked up from the holographic display, his eyes wide with excitement. Niran, do you realize what this means? We have a chance to share our story with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. This could be the spark that ignites change on a scale we never imagined. Niran nodded, her own face a mix of elation and trepidation. It's an incredible opportunity, but also a huge responsibility. We'll need to prepare a presentation that truly captures the essence of what we've accomplished here. They threw themselves into the task, working long hours to distill their experiences and the stories of the students they had impacted into a powerful narrative. Late one night, as they huddled over a series of data visualizations, a chime sounded from Niran's communicator. "It's a message from the Tarkalian Academy," she said, her eyes scanning the text. "A group of students have organized a surprise event in our honor. They want us to attend the unveiling of an art installation they've created." Intrigued, Russell and Niran made their way to the Academy grounds the following day. As they approached the central courtyard, they were greeted by a sea of smiling faces, students and faculty alike. In the center of the space stood a towering structure, its surfaces shimmering with holographic projections. As they drew closer, the images resolved into a breathtaking mosaic of faces and scenes. Each one told a story. A Tarkalian girl beaming with pride as she received a prestigious science award, a group of students from different backgrounds working together on a complex engineering project, a young male Tarkalian standing tall as he delivered a passionate speech on equality. "We call it the ripple effect," a soft voice said from behind them. They turned to see a slender female student, her scales a delicate shade of lavender. Each image represents a life that has been touched by your work, a story of transformation and hope. Russell felt a lump forming in his throat as he took in the scope of the installation. The sheer number of faces, the depth of emotion captured in each one. It was overwhelming. "Thank you," Niran managed, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you can possibly know." They spent hours at the installation, listening to the stories of the students featured within it. Each one added a new layer of depth and meaning to their understanding of the impact they had made. As they prepared to depart for the Galactic Council Summit, the weight of those stories settled on their shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. They carried them with them as they boarded the sleek council vessel, as they stepped onto the stage before an audience of thousands of delegates from across the stars. Russell looked out at the sea of alien faces, each one representing a world with its own challenges and struggles. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "On Tarkus Prime, we learned that change is not easy. It requires sacrifice, determination, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even in the face of opposition." He spoke of their battles against discrimination and corruption, of the students who had inspired them with their resilience and bravery. Beside him, Niran shared the stories of the ripple effect, her voice ringing with passion and conviction. As they concluded their presentation, the audience erupted into thunderous applause. In the days that followed, they were approached by countless delegates, each one eager to learn from their experiences and apply those lessons to their own worlds. "Your story has given me hope," a delegate from a war-torn planet confided in Russell. If you can achieve such profound change in the face of such adversity, perhaps there is a chance for my people as well. Another delegate, a renowned educator from a technologically advanced world, sought out Neron's advice on implementing more inclusive teaching practices. Your insights have challenged me to re-examine my own biases and assumptions, she admitted. I believe we have much to learn from your approach. As the summit drew to a close, the Galactic Council made a momentous announcement. They would be forming an interplanetary task force on educational equity, with Russell and Neran at its helm. Your work on Tarkus Prime has shown us the transformative power of education, the Council spokesperson declared. We believe that by working together, by sharing our knowledge and experiences, we can create a galaxy where every individual has the opportunity to reach their full potential. Russell and Neran looked at each other, their eyes shining with a mix of excitement and determination. They knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, that they would face new obstacles and opposition at every turn. But they also knew that they would not be facing those challenges alone. They had each other, and now they had the support of the Galactic Council and countless allies from across the stars. Together, they would work to build a future where diversity was celebrated, where inclusion was the norm, and where every student had the chance to shine. It was a daunting task, but one they were ready to embrace with open hearts and unwavering resolve. As Russell and Neron settled into their new roles on the Interplanetary Task Force, their communicators buzzed with an urgent message from Tarkus Prime. Russell's brow furrowed as he read the contents, his eyes widening with each passing line. Neron, we need to go back, he said, his voice tight with concern. Some students have uncovered evidence of a secret society within the Academy, dedicated to preserving the old ways of discrimination. They're receiving death threats. Neron's scales paled, her hands trembling as she reached for the communicator. We can't let this happen, not after everything we've fought for. Within hours, they were on a ship hurtling back towards Tarkus Prime, their hearts heavy with worry. As they landed, they were greeted by a small group of Tarkalian students, their faces etched with fear and determination. Thank you for coming, a young male named Zarthax said, his voice shaking. We didn't know who else to turn to. Russell and Neran followed the students to a secluded room where they huddled around a holographic display. Encrypted communications and financial records flashed across the screen, linking the secret society to some of the most powerful figures on Tarkus Prime. This goes deeper than we ever imagined, Neran breathed, her eyes widening in horror. The government, the business world, they're all involved. Russell's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. We need to bring this to the authorities, now. They gathered the evidence and marched straight to the Tarkalian High Council, their footsteps echoing through the marble halls. The council members listened in stunned silence as Russell and Neran presented their findings, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. This is treason of the highest order, the High Counselor said, his voice shaking with rage. We will launch a full-scale investigation immediately. As the investigation unfolded, the extent of the secret society's influence became clear. They had been working tirelessly to sabotage the reforms, using their wealth and power to maintain the status quo of inequality and discrimination. One by one, members of the society were brought before the council, their faces twisted with hatred and defiance. They spat accusations and threats, but the evidence against them was irrefutable. Conspiracy, corruption, bribery. The charges piled up, each one more damning than the last. In the wake of the arrests, the Tarkalian government announced a series of sweeping new measures to root out discrimination and corruption at every level of society. An independent oversight body was formed to monitor the implementation of the educational reforms, while new laws and regulations were put in place to prevent the formation of secret societies and other groups dedicated to perpetuating inequality. On the streets of Tarkus Prime, Russell and Neron were hailed as heroes once again. Tarkalians of all ages and backgrounds approached them, tears of gratitude streaming down their faces. Thank you, they whispered, clasping Russell and Niran's hands in their own. Thank you for never giving up on us. The students who had uncovered the secret society were celebrated as well, their bravery and dedication an inspiration to all. Many of them went on to become leaders in the movement for change, their voices ringing out strong and clear across the planet. But even as they basked in the glow of their victory, Russell and Niran knew that their work was far from over. There would always be those who sought to preserve the old ways, who clung to power and privilege at the expense of others. They exchanged a glance, their eyes locked in silent understanding. They would never stop fighting, never stop pushing for a better, more just world. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, their bond unbreakable and their resolve unwavering. As the weight of their victory sank in, Russell and Niran threw themselves back into their work with renewed vigor. The Interplanetary Task Force on Educational Equity had a monumental task ahead of them, but they were determined to create real, lasting change on a galactic scale. They pored over data and case studies from dozens of worlds, analyzing what worked and what didn't. They consulted with experts in pedagogy, sociology, and anthropology, seeking to understand the complex interplay of factors that shaped educational outcomes. Slowly but surely, a set of guidelines began to take shape, a framework for creating inclusive, equitable learning environments that could be adapted to the unique needs and challenges of each world. As they worked, a chime sounded from the communications console. Russell tapped the screen, his eyebrows rising as he read the incoming message. "It's from the Galactic Council," he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "They're convening a special session on educational reform and they want us to present our progress." Niran's eyes widened. "This is it," she breathed. "A chance to get our recommendations in front of leaders from across the galaxy." They threw themselves into preparing for the presentation, refining their arguments and crafting compelling visuals. On Tarkus Prime, word of Russell and Niran's upcoming appearance spread like wildfire. In the streets and classrooms, a buzz of excitement grew. Students who had once felt voiceless and marginalized saw an opportunity to make their voices heard. A group of young Tarkalians, inspired by Russell and Niran's example, began to organize. They reached out to their peers, sharing their own stories of discrimination and exclusion. They held meetings and rallies, passed out leaflets, and posted on social media. Their message was simple but powerful, that every student deserved a fair chance, regardless of their background or identity. That diversity was a strength, not a weakness. That change was possible if they were willing to fight for it. As the grassroots movement gained steam, Russell and Niran stepped onto the stage at the Galactic Council special session. They looked out at the sea of faces, representatives from 1,000 worlds, and felt a swell of hope and purpose. They spoke of the struggles and triumphs they had witnessed on Tarkus Prime, of the students who had risked everything to stand up for what was right. They laid out their task force's recommendations, painting a vivid picture of a future where every child could reach their full potential. As they concluded, the chamber erupted into thunderous applause. In the days that followed, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to adopt the task force's guidelines as official policy, a landmark achievement that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Amidst the celebrations, a group of humans approached Russell and Niran. They introduced themselves as a delegation from Earth, sent to learn from the successes of the Tarkalian reforms. "Your story has inspired people across our planet," one delegate said, her eyes shining with admiration. "We believe that your experiences could help us address our own challenges with educational inequity. Would you be willing to come back to Earth, to share your insights with our global community?" Russell and Niran exchanged a glance, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. They had fought so hard, come so far, but they knew that their work was just beginning. "We would be honored," Russell said, clasping the delegate's hand. "Let's show them what's possible when we stand together." As Russell and Niran began collaborating with the Earth students to devise a comprehensive reform strategy, they quickly encountered fierce opposition from an unexpected source. A cabal of affluent and powerful parents, fearing that the proposed changes would undermine their children's entrenched advantages, launched a coordinated campaign to undermine Russell and Niran's credibility and obstruct any attempts at reforming the educational system. These influential figures leveraged their extensive connections in the media and government to disseminate a barrage of misinformation and propaganda. They portrayed Russell and Niran as meddlesome outsiders intent on imposing alien values and ideologies on human society, stirring up xenophobic sentiment among certain segments of the population. Undaunted by the mounting opposition, Russell and Niran redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly alongside the students and their allies to build grassroots support for their cause. They organized a series of rallies and events, bringing together diverse communities to share their stories and experiences, and to highlight the urgent need for systemic change. At the same time, Russell and Niran reached out to their contacts within the Galactic Council and the Interplanetary Task Force, seeking guidance and resources to counter the opposition's increasingly aggressive tactics. They knew that they would need all the help they could get to overcome the entrenched interests aligned against them. As tensions continued to escalate, Russell and Niran received an anonymous tip from a source within the opposition group. The informant revealed that the group's leaders had been covertly channeling funds to a notorious private security firm, with the aim of employing strong-arm tactics to sabotage the reform efforts and intimidate supporters into silence. Alarmed by this disturbing revelation, Russell and Niran immediately contacted local law enforcement authorities, urging them to investigate the allegations and take swift action to ensure the safety of the students and their allies. They knew that they could not allow these underhanded tactics to derail their mission. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the opposition group's activities extended far beyond mere political maneuvering. A tangled web of corruption and deceit began to emerge, implicating powerful figures at the highest levels of local government and the business community. Faced with the mounting evidence of wrongdoing, public opinion began to shift decisively in favor of the reform movement. The opposition group's tactics were laid bare for all to see, sparking widespread condemnation and calls for accountability. Bolstered by the growing support from the community and the unwavering backing of the Galactic Council, Russell and Niran seized the momentum to push forward with their ambitious plans for reform. They worked hand in hand with the students and local educators to implement a sweeping series of changes designed to create a more equitable and inclusive educational environment. Together, they crafted a new curriculum that celebrated diversity and promoted critical thinking, replacing outdated and biased materials with a more balanced and representative approach. They advocated for the recruitment and hiring of a more diverse faculty, recognizing the importance of having educators who reflected the rich tapestry of human experience. Perhaps most importantly, Russell and Niran helped to establish a range of innovative programs and initiatives aimed at supporting and empowering marginalized students. From mentorship networks and leadership development workshops to community outreach projects and social justice campaigns, these efforts sought to level the playing field and provide every student with the tools and opportunities they needed to succeed. As the reforms began to take root, the impact was felt far beyond the walls of the classroom. A new sense of hope and possibility had taken hold, inspiring students and educators alike to dream big and work tirelessly towards a brighter, more equitable future. But even as they celebrated these hard-won victories, Russell and Niran knew that their work was far from over. The forces of resistance and reaction were still out there, waiting for any opportunity to roll back the progress they had made. One evening, as they pored over a stack of documents detailing the latest developments in the reform effort, Russell's communicator buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing as he read the cryptic text. "We need to talk," the message read. "There's something you need to know about the opposition group's next move." With the reforms taking root on Earth, Russell and Niran felt a sense of accomplishment, their tireless efforts finally bearing fruit. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. An urgent message from their Tarkalian contacts shattered their brief respite, plunging them back into the fray. "Russell, Niran, we need you back on Tarkus Prime." The holographic image of their friend and ally, Commander Zaxxon, flickered before them. A radical faction has risen up against the government, led by a ruthless zealot named Zarn. They've seized control of several cities and are imposing a brutal regime of oppression and segregation, undoing everything we've fought for. Russell and Niran exchanged a grim look, the weight of their responsibility settling heavily upon their shoulders. They knew they couldn't abandon their Tarkalian friends, not after everything they'd been through together. "We're on our way," Russell said, his jaw set with determination. Within hours, they were on a ship hurtling through the stars, racing back to the planet that had become their second home. As they approached Tarkus Prime, the extent of the crisis became apparent. Smoke billowed from the ruins of once thriving cities, and the streets echoed with the sounds of violence and chaos. Russell and Niran wasted no time in joining forces with the Tarkalian military and the Loyalist rebels, throwing themselves into the fight against Zarn's brutal regime. They worked tirelessly to counter the faction's propaganda, spreading messages of hope and unity to the beleaguered populace. But as the conflict escalated, it became clear that words alone would not be enough. Russell and Niran found themselves on the front lines, fighting alongside their Tarkalian comrades in a desperate battle for the planet's future. Blaster fire streaked through the air as Russell ducked behind a crumbling wall, his heart pounding in his chest. Beside him, Niran crouched low, her scales glistening with sweat and grime. "We have to take out their communications hub," she shouted over the din of battle. "If we can disrupt their coordination, we might stand a chance." Russell nodded grimly, checking the charge on his weapon. "I'll draw their fire, buy you some time to get in there and work your magic." "No way," Niran said fiercely, gripping his arm. "We do this together or not at all." Together, they charged across the rubble-strewn battlefield, dodging enemy fire as they fought their way towards the looming communications tower. Russell felt a searing pain in his shoulder as a blaster bolt grazed him, but he pushed through, focused only on their objective. As they reached the base of the tower, a figure emerged from the shadows, a sneer twisting his reptilian features. Zarn, the leader of the radical faction, stood before them, a crackling energy staff in his clawed hands. "I had hoped to meet the famous Russell and Niran," he hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "And now you shall die as traitors to the true Tarkalian way." What followed was a brutal, no-holds-barred battle as Russell and Zarn clashed in a flurry of strikes and counterstrikes. The air hummed with the clash of their weapons, the stench of ozone and singed flesh filling the air. Nearby, Niran worked frantically to hack into the communications hub, her fingers flying over the alien interface. Sweat poured down her face as she battled against the system's defenses, knowing that every second counted. As Russell and Zarn fought, a stray blaster bolt struck a nearby fuel cell, setting off a massive explosion. The shockwave sent both combatants tumbling, their weapons knocked from their hands. Dazed and bleeding, they rose to their feet, prepared to settle their conflict with nothing but their bare hands. With a roar of primal fury, Zarn lunged at Russell, his claws outstretched. Russell met him head-on, years of training and raw determination fueling his every move. They grappled and strained, each trying to gain the upper hand. Just as it seemed that Zarn might overwhelm him, Russell heard a triumphant shout from Niran. The communications tower erupted in a shower of sparks and flames, the signal amplifying her virus across the planet. In an instant, the tide of battle turned as the radical faction's coordination crumbled. Seizing his chance, Russell delivered a devastating blow to Zarn's throat, crushing his windpipe. The Tarkalian leader crumpled to the ground, his eyes bulging as he gasped for air. With a final, gurgling breath, he lay still. Around them, the sounds of battle began to fade as the Loyalist forces gained ground. Niran staggered to Russell's side, her face etched with exhaustion and grief. They had won, but the cost had been high. Too many of their friends and allies lay dead or wounded, the scars of the conflict running deep. In the days that followed, Russell and Niran worked tirelessly to help rebuild the shattered Tarkalian society. They mourned with the families of the fallen, comforted the wounded, and labored alongside the survivors to restore what had been lost. And though the struggle for equality and justice was far from over, they took solace in the knowledge that they had made a difference. that their work, their sacrifices, had not been in vain. As they prepared to return to Earth, Russell and Niran bid a bittersweet farewell to their Tarkalian friends and allies. They embraced Commander Zaxxon, tears streaming down their faces as they realized they might never see him again. "We will never forget what you've done for us," Zaxxon said, his voice thick with emotion. "You will always have a home here, among the people you fought for." Back on Earth, Russell and Niran were hailed as heroes, their names spoken with reverence and awe. But they knew that their true legacy lay not in accolades or honors, but in the countless lives they had touched, the seeds of change they had planted. As they looked to the future, they knew that the fight for a better world would be long and hard, that there would be setbacks and challenges at every turn. But they would face them together, united in their unwavering commitment to justice and equality. Hand in hand, Russell and Niran stood tall, ready to meet whatever lay ahead. For they knew that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come, as long as there were those willing to fight for it.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.